Hello and welcome to UC Today. We are back for another big UC news show. Today we have our expert guests joining us once again. Let's do a quick round of introductions. Irwin, Melody, Evan, Craig, and Mr. UC influencer himself, Zeus Kerravala. Welcome to the show. And of course, my co-host for today's show, Kieran Devlin, welcome as well. We've got a great schedule of content today. We're going to start off with a little bit around the events that have just been going on over the last couple of weeks. Really interesting announcements and showcases to come out of those. We're going to be talking tariffs as well. It's all over the mainstream media at the moment, but from a tech perspective, there's some quite big ramifications coming out of the tariff situations in the US. And then last but not least, we're going to be talking about Copilot as well and the latest iteration coming out of Microsoft. So let's get started. I'm going to throw it over to Kieran in a second. Kieran, what are the events we're talking about today, and why are they significant?
Thanks, David. Well, as with every spring, it's been a whirlwind few weeks and months with myriad massive events and trade shows. We've from one of the biggest ever Enterprise Connects to vendor-centric shows with Google and Canva. Irwin, what have been some of your highlights from the events over the past few weeks, especially Google Next? I understand you were there. What were some of your favourite trends and topics from that event?
Yeah, so I attended Google Next last week in Las Vegas. 32,000 people, just incredible energy in the event. I obviously focusing on the collaboration announcements that they made. Obviously for this event, this is Google's cloud overall customer event. So they focused on things like a cloud WAN announcement, new AI processing, the ability to run Google Cloud in a disconnected area. But really on the collaboration side, it was infusing AI across the product portfolio. They started Tuesday night with a demo at a place called The Sphere, a giant 18,000 seat immersive theater in Las Vegas, where they showed how they were using their AI capabilities to re-engineer the sound of the Wizard of Oz in order to immerse people in the entire movie, and how it's not just a matter of stretching the movie, but it's a matter of engineering what is off screen in your perception watching the original that you would have to show in the Sphere to have that full experience. Beyond that, it was bringing, like I said, AI into across their workspace portfolio, which is really where I focused. The ability to take a document and generate an audio summary of it, to generate a podcast similar to what you can do now with Notebook LM. The ability to have Gemini as a participant in meetings and chat, where you can ask it questions during the chat and have that visible to all people within a chat versus, let me go ask Gemini and come back with the response. Grammar and writing capabilities that are driven by AI, leveraging their AI video engine to allow you to create videos in the Vids application through simple queries and refine those videos until you get them to where you want them to be. An AI data analyst living resident within Sheets that allows you to write formulas that call AI to do things like summarize open text responses from a survey. And that ability to create workflows, to automate workflows easily, again, within different applications. I thought, that was really the story from the collaboration standpoint. It's continuing to infuse AI throughout the portfolio versus, like if you look at Microsoft and the competing Copilot solution, where a Copilot is something you have to pay extra for, and it's a separate functionality you have to decide you're going to purchase. Within the Google story, this is all resident and built into Workspace.
Yeah, Erwin, I thought the Verizon, the AI assistant they talked about was pretty interesting. Focused on 28,000 customer service reps and trained on like 15,000 internal documents, and that's a CX story. But as you mentioned, this could be a knowledge worker story as well, having your personal in-house AI assistant at hand to deal with any internal product or other questions. That's kind of a big deal. I'm surprised they could talk about it so publicly now.
Yeah, the conversational chat demo was really interesting. I think they made those announcements right before Enterprise Connect, but they did a live demo on stage with an AI conversational chatbot. Very much a natural language experience. Had some customers who talked about how they were taking very large percentages of their inbound requests and being able to resolve those through AI versus having to escalate those to a live person.
One of the things they announced that I really was interested in as well, I had a chance to also attend with Irwin, was their workflow automation application for end users. They called it Flows. Now, what's really interesting about Google is we really are talking about taking it all the way from the beginning of the process down to the end user experience. They first start with something they call Agent Garden. This is where a high-level IT administrator might create those connections back to CRM or ERP, or maybe even if it's a smaller enterprise, it might connect maybe to their transaction web store or something like that. Then they go to the next level, which is they call GEMS, and it stands for, you would think it for Gemini, but it stands for Google Enterprise Management something, I forget what it is. But their acronym is the idea that now at this level, we can start giving the levels of permission that we want to give to these automated agents. This is where agents are enabled to say, hey, Craig has access to this data, but maybe Evan or David doesn't, or something like that as well too. And then ultimately you get down to workflows. And what happens at that workflow level, this is where I may create these things to make my life easier and increase my productivity. I may or may not access those gems. It's probably my choice if they're giving to me. But what I liked about this is it kind of goes full circle. And it's really taking an agentic AI concept, and for me, it's threading the needle to bring it to how it impacts myself as an end user, which I think is one of the elusive problems within our industry right now, is we're all talking agentic AI.
Yeah, I'm going to put the Google skeptic hat on. I think the demo you talked about was pretty cool, Irwin. Google's historically used, its show to launch all kinds of cool tech, but nothing ever seems to stick to the point where they actually make a serious enterprise play. Even like you look at, Google Cloud, they're a distant number 3 on the, the workspace side. I've been kind of years and years, I predicted that they'd actually make a bigger dent. And I think part of the problem there is search is so big that even if they were to capture like 20% of the CX market, which would be remarkable, I don't know if it really moves the needle at Google, right? So it seems like they're really good at throwing out lots of cool tech, but then they get it 90% of the way of making it like enterprise grade, and the extra amount of investment it takes to get it to the last 10% seems to fall away as they move on to the next thing. And so, what I'd like to see out of Google is just a little more consistency and take one of these enterprise markets seriously. And, again, if it's, search related, nobody does it better than Google. Although it'll be interesting to see what happens with all the generative AI tools out there. I saw for the first time ever Google's search share actually dropped below 90%. And that's without taking into account all the shift away from search to Gen AI. So, maybe with the search being threatened, they might actually put a little more focus on the enterprise side, which actually I think would be good for everybody.
What I think was interesting, there wasn't really any mention of email. Google has always kind of had that battle, I think, internally of, hey, we come from the Gmail world and we still aren't quite ready to fully embrace chat, but yet chat and meetings had way more coverage, way more announcements, I think, than what, again, I didn't really see anything out of email. But to your point, like they're playing in certain niche areas. They're definitely focusing on trying to achieve parity, if not a leadership position around document and content creation. I think for me, the biggest missing piece continues to be voice. If they're going to truly compete with Microsoft and try and get companies to consider moving from Teams onto the Google suite, they have to have a voice story, and they really don't at this point. They have Google Voice, they don't talk about it. They don't have none of the AI features, capabilities that were talked about being extended into Google Voice, and I think that that has been the giant gaping hole, I guess, in their portfolio.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I've been saying this a while, that I think Gen AI creates a voice renaissance, because a lot of the apps and services we use, we will interface through voice. And so that lack of a global voice, platform actually might become their, the gating factor that holds them out of this, right? So, there's no question they don't have the resources. They have the resources to go build it if they want to. The question is, as my dad always used to say to me as a kid, where there's a will, there's a way. But in my case, the will was lacking. So, but Asian parents.
So should we move on to our next one? Enterprise Connect just happened last month. It is moving, though. We are going to Las Vegas next year. Zeus, what did you make of that one? I mean, that was an AI fest this year, but what do you make of the event and the move?
Was it an AI fest? It was kind of a name, but I ran into aircraft in the hall, and I said, it's trying to become an AI show. And if you look, I think somewhere some VC had a list of the 300 conversational AI companies that were in existence today. None of them were at Enterprise Connect, right? So I think that show has really changed over the years. It's become more CX focused, more AI focused. That's the vendors have shifted their accordingly. But the expo hall was as small as I'd ever seen it. I think we're all used to that hallway between the Gaylord and the conference center being WebExed out or Avaya out before that. And that wasn't the case this year. And it just seemed like that show has reached its limit at the Gaylord. And so is moving to Vegas to be kind of co-resident with HIMSS the best thing for it? Time will tell. But I think it'll be different. And I think that show needs some kind of infusion and different to get it back. So the question is going to be, though, is if it's going to be held at the same time as HIMSS. If you're a big sponsor, like I know Cisco is a big sponsor of HIMSS or a big sponsor of Enterprise Connect, are they going to do both, right? And you may only choose to do one to the other, but you might get some spillover from the HIMSS audience coming over to see what's going on and stuff. So I, like I said, I don't know if it's the best fit. I know, Craig had some thoughts around other shows, but I think, like I said, in this case, I think different is good for Enterprise Connect.
Here's my analogy. Ready? Clear. We need to jumpstart EC again. This is kind of its attempt to do it. I think there's a couple of good things that are take place here. I think one of the long-standing criticisms of Enterprise Connect over the years is that there's been fewer and fewer end customers at the event. And I think it's been a problem of being at the Gaylord on the East Coast for so many years. I think it kind of exhausted that regional or circular idea of customers coming in. So moving to the West Coast should help infuse some new customers' visitation. Is it going to become a customer show again? I don't think so. I think it really needs to lean in on the fact that it is really becoming an enterprise or industry to industry conversation. It is vendors presenting to analysts. It's vendors presenting to partners. It is vendors talking to other vendors. And there's a lot more taking place in the suites around the center than there's taking place actually in the expo. So that goes to where I think they're missing something. One of Informa's other shows that they actually have just a week or two later, David, you wound up attending it, was Channel Partners. And that event actually seems to align more to this industry talking to industry idea. And I think if they're going to move to Vegas and they're looking to try and create some synergies, either in terms of audience or other expenditure, I don't think HIMSS is the right match. I think Channel Partners is the one, because it starts aligning to what their core competencies are becoming, which is an industry talking to industry event, which is okay.
I can give the perspective of somebody who wasn't there. I was actually not there this year. I had conflicts. And it seems like everybody that I heard from just said it was not the same, not the number of people, not the same energy. And then when I got even like pre-briefings weren't as heavy as they were in previous years. Like there's just not that much effort being put into it, I think, from the vendors. And then I did watch some of the keynotes, and I could have been replaying last year's keynotes. I just don't think there was anything truly unique. I did not feel like I was missing out. And that everybody who I talked to basically has confirmed that with me. So I hope it gets like kind of its mojo back going to Vegas. I do agree with some of the things about, kind of the geographic location might help with that. And I do think there is a lot of overlap now with healthcare. And so if that can happen in a way logistically that makes sense for people, it's often really hard to jump between two shows at the same time. But if it can happen logistically, and actually I think vendors are going to have to sort of really plan for that, because oftentimes, you all know, like we'll get invited to two different briefings at the same time, and it's like, well, which one do you go to? it's hard to kind of jump back and forth even when you're remote, much less in person. So they're going to have to really coordinate and make that an effort coordination.
I do think your point on the keynotes is a good one. It's they're very product focused now. They weren't quite as demo-y as they have been in the past, but the days of John Chambers being on stage talking about changing the way we work, live, learn, and play are long in the rearview mirror, right? And so we could use a little more vision in the keynotes and less product, and actually that I think would help draw people in more than anything.
Let's move on to our next event then, and it's one that's looks a bit unusual, looks a bit out of place in the schedule to me, and that was Canva. That was just last week, I think. Zeus and Mel, you were both there. First of all, why are we talking about the Canva event, and how does it relate to the UC and collab space? Mel, do you want to give us your kind of lowdown there?
Sure, yeah. So Canva just had their second, and they called it their biggest ever, which was kind of funny because it was only the second. But it was good, and I think they definitely learned some things from last year, like not to rap on stage, although they did like a tiny little rap. But they had some really interesting announcements. Their Visual Suite 2.0, which is kind of basically just central to kind of their whole keep everything in one single platform. But that included some enhanced data capabilities, which includes Canvas Sheets, which I think is actually kind of very important and pretty cool. And then Magic Charts, which actually Magic Charts, I think, is another really interesting one, which is a visual data storytelling platform. So a lot of the things I talked about, that people really need to see like some visual of data and to be able to tell a story. And it does a lot for you. So it's not just like, here you can create a chart in this. It actually will take the data that you have and suggest the best chart to display that type of data. So kind of a bunch of just AI powered tools across the platform. So a lot of it is for creativity and productivity. But where I think that there was one other thing, which is their Canva code, which I'm going to compare to what people are now calling vibe coding. So the jump on the vibe coding trend. But basically, whatever you can think of and just put in natural language, Canva code will help you to design it. So if it's an app, a website, widget, any sort of visual kind of creative that will live in any of your documents. But how this relates to UC is they do have, so separate from all of their big announcements, they did talk a lot about their ecosystem and partnerships. And so Canva does have integrations directly into Microsoft Teams, into Slack, Google Workspace, HubSpot. So you can connect all of these things so that people can come in, collaborate, and publish campaign assets directly within, say, Teams or HubSpot or Salesforce. They also have custom APIs and an SDK for building these integrations into like specific UC workflows. So there's a lot of automation and processes and kind of customizing the use of Canva within whichever communication platform system that you want, and a lot of focus on collaboration features, so in real time. And then kind of the last thing, I guess, is like central asset management. So I think we'll start to see more of these collaborations because people want to work in one space, whether it is in Teams or whether it's in Canva. If you have to create something and jump back in and drag it over, it's just a lot messier than if you can stay within that platform. And I know this happens a lot within Slack, that people can just stay within that platform. When you live in Slack all day, or you live in Teams all day, or if you're a designer, you're likely to live in, or marketer, you're likely to live in Canva most of your day, but most people don't. They're more likely to be in Teams or Slack or Zoom. And so having those Canva connections directly into those platforms is smart.
I think that it's kind of interesting to think about the future though, and how, Adobe and Canva and, Microsoft Office and, Irwin, you mentioned the Google Suite, they're kind of heading for a collision course. And I think what I like about Canva, and Mel, you and I talked to Kelly Stuckelberg, their new CFO who came from Zoom, about this. When you think about the traditional way we collaborate and do creative, right? Word replicates a piece of paper. PowerPoint replicates a piece of paper turned sideways. Excel is just a bigger piece of paper, right? And so they're trying to rethink. It's a little bit what Zoom's trying to do with their docs platform as well, although that's why nobody likes the term Zoom Docs, because it's not really docs. It's it's creating more kind of living, breathing, content that when you think about like Word, why does it have to end at 8.5 by 11? Why can't it just be one continuous stream, right? Things like that. And so, I think what AI has done is allow everyone to be creative, right? Which is historically, in fact, they had some interesting terminology. They thought there were people that are data shy and data savvy, and typically the data shy people are the people that need to be able to analyze data, but then we send it to data savvy people. And if you can bring those two worlds together, productivity and creativity, you can really fundamentally change the way people work. So I think, everyone, all the UC vendors, the creative companies, the document vendors, they're all trying to help us be more productive through their own lens. But these tools are coming together, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see who, as these companies partner, they're going to start competing and how they manage those things, because that's we don't, the one thing users don't want is 85 different tools with 85 different AI agents to do their job, and the vendors will evolve their products accordingly, but that's going to create a lot of overlap in partnerships.
It is. I'm glad you mentioned Adobe, because there's a little bit of a renaissance here. I remember, and I think it's still actually there, Adobe Connect, which is a communication platform that's integrated within the Adobe ecosystem. And it was never really had a strong base of users except for creatives. But if creativity is becoming more democratized, and things like Canva and Adobe all of us are being access to it, the idea of bringing communication back to where you're working, I think, becomes more viable. Will it ever steal share from Teams or Zoom? No, not necessarily, but it does create a nice niche market that allows certain end users to actually still communicate and collaborate in a single pane of glass. And I think that's the important idea here, is that we might start going to our specialty areas where we're going to collaborate now and just live there through connectors and AI agents. And gosh, workflows would be the next thing. And once we start getting workflows taking place across all these platforms, they can communicate across these different elements of data. And
you might be able to tell your gem to pull something from your Canva and put it into your doc. I mean, these are all very possible things. I think the one last thing I would say about Canva was that they really emphasized a lot of these kind of creator-centric advancements. And I think if they're really going to push on these enterprise level benefits, they have to kind of talk a little bit more about like the scalability of it, the ability to manage the solutions, like for brand control, for content generation, just kind of more at scale. They do a good job of kind of brushing on that. I think they've got to really emphasize it more if they're really going to go after somebody like Adobe. It's just not, they're not at that same level. And you may even, like, if you look at both events from Adobe Summit and Canva Create, they both had Coca-Cola as a customer, like as highlighted. And my guess is, and I haven't gotten the numbers here, but my guess is the number of seats that Coca-Cola has for Adobe is like multiples larger than what they have for Canva. So I'm thinking it's more small teams within like an HR function or finance function, not their big kind of creative powerhouse teams. So they've got to talk about that a little bit more.
You had some numbers of what you thought their valuation was, the IPO. You mentioned it on social media.
40 billion is Canva's current valuation. So, then they've refused acquisition. They've steadfastly stated they're going public. So I'm sure that's why they hired Kelly.
Good hire for that. I think we could all agree to that.
Let's move on to our next topic of conversation. It's a big one. Tariffs. If you've been watching the mainstream media, it's undoubtable you have seen tariffs. What Mr. Donald Trump is doing to the global economy right now. Kieran, how has this impacted the UC market? What are you seeing?
Well, where to begin? As you say, David, it's been a significant impact across the world, full stop. But of course, it does have a disproportionate impact on UC and collaboration. Over the weekend, Logitech withdrew guidance for its 2026 fiscal year, citing uncertainty around the tariffs. This feels a little like the canary in the coal mine for UC and collaboration. Evan, what's your take on how the tariffs tumult is impacting our space? What are you hearing from vendors and users, and what is your own perspective?
Well, my own perspective is it's chaos out there in the wider market, but specifically in enterprise. Some of our favorite devices and endpoints, obviously laptops and cell phones, but many, many more are manufactured in China. And there are a lot of direct, not just manufacturers, but OEM labels. I'm thinking of Grandstream and others who are very, very popular in the enterprise, have amazing price performance, and sell directly under their own brand. They're going to be hit. But then the big OEMs who manufacture in China are being hit. And it's not a matter of a 10 or 20, 30% tariff, prices increase, you adjust, what have you. These current levels, 100, 145, 150%, make your product unsellable in any fashion. And so supply chains are going to be really strained, and supply is going to be constrained. And I think a lot of projects are going to be delayed unless there's some resolution to this. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I just got back from Augusta, which is in the heart of Trump territory, and listen to talk radio there. I can tell you all the great things that tariffs are going to bring, but the reality is, it's created havoc with the tech companies and their partners because of the uncertainty. I think everyone's accepting the fact that tariffs are going to happen, but it's the constant yo-yoing of we're in, we're out, we're in, we're out. And I was talking to one of the larger Cisco resellers about this, where they were saying that they were helping the companies, their customers plan for the tariffs. They were going to pre-buy some equipment, before the price hikes came, and then the stay came, the pause came on them, and then pushed out projects even further. And in tech, how fast things change in 90 days, 180 days, and so it's the inability to plan. In fact, at Mobile World Congress, in the Chuck Robbins roundtable, this question came up, and he said, they created contingencies to mitigate around the tariffs, but now that they're changing again, he's having to create contingencies against the contingencies. And so it's not the tariffs themselves. You can plan around that. It's the uncertainty that this administration has created in trying to plan that's really caused the problem. And I think he needs to pick a path and move forward with it, because this, like I said, this constant yo-yoing of policy isn't helping anybody out.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's the uncertainty. It's if you're a business thinking about making investments right now, how do you make any kind of decision that will that you'll be confident that it'll be the right decision 6 months from now without knowing what direction we're heading?
Well, and you talk to some of the bigger companies, like Intel was talking about this. If indeed the best decision is to build, manufacture locally, that's fine, but it takes years to build a plant, right? You're not just going to spin up a plant in 2 weeks. And so if you go down that path and then a year from now, all this was a simple bargaining tool for, this administration to be able to get what they want from other countries, and they go back to the way they were, then they've wasted a year. So how can you go about, building a plant that's going to take multi-years to do if you don't actually know that they're going to stick? And so I think it's an unfair situation the business world's been put in. And I mean, the capital markets have shown there, the uncertainty isn't, has forced a pretty big sell-off, right? Bigger drop in, capital value than we've seen since even before the pandemic.
I think there's one other thing that's not talked about a ton, which is just the threat to innovation, right? Like if people are having to cut back on so much spending, that means they're cutting back on R&D. That means they're possibly using cheaper components. This affects both the company's ability to innovate, but also what the end consumer ends up with. Like if you think in the case of smartphones, right? Like we may get dumb phones because the supply chain is going to be destroyed for a while. So, and the cutback in R&D. So I think there's a lot of shift from engineering teams right now to have to focus on cost reduction rather than creating the best things. And that's a threat to both the companies and the consumers. And,
Bring back the dumb phone.
right? I just want my BlackBerry
Landlines
back.
rule, yes.
Somebody give me a BlackBerry that works and I'd be really happy.
So should we move on to our last topic of the day? We are running out of time, but we'll quickly try and squeeze it in. Microsoft Copilot. They've launched the latest iteration of features for Copilot. This comes at the dawn of the 50th anniversary for Microsoft, a big milestone. Who would have thought a tech company that is 50 years old? Wow. Kieran, what's the lowdown?
Yep, thanks, David. So Microsoft celebrated its 50th anniversary just over a week ago, and what better way to celebrate such a massive event with AI features? There was a major upgrade for Copilot, including advanced memory and personalization capabilities, and the very interesting, potentially creepy screen reading and analysis via the form of what is called Copilot Vision. Craig, what have been your takeaways from Copilot's overhaul?
I'm gonna make another funny. It's like an Oprah show. It's like AI for everyone. You get AI. You get AI. We all get AI. Well, I think you're right. You hit some of the key features, and it's interesting how it's driving it toward a more personalized experience. The memory update, the personalization is kind of interesting. This is the idea that I have a chat, and I might say, "Hey, it's my birthday," and in another chat, it remembers that it's my birthday because it updated its overall memory of my interactions. But the Copilot Vision is one that is interesting. This is the ability for Copilot to read what your screen is seeing on your browser. Microsoft actually tried to do something like this similar when it first launched some earlier ideas, and it definitely got the hand of being a creep factor before. But interestingly enough, in the competitive market, OpenAI released a similar feature back in January of this year. They called it Operator, and this was kind of their first agent, they called it. Same idea. It had the ability for the AI to read what was on your screen as you're interacting with it and providing guidance as well too. So maybe there's more acceptance in market for this idea that Microsoft tried to do in an earlier iteration early on. It's still a little creepy. There is one actually interesting thing that makes either it really powerful or creepier, is that it also has an actions capability too. So not only can it see with vision of what's taking place on your screen, but you can give it permission to actually perform tasks for you within that web browser. Complete this purchase for me. Buy these tickets, things like that as well too. So the barrier has been removed about this kind of being a teammate, a true co-pilot. And I think we have to see what the market acceptance is for being crossing the border again, like it did a couple of years, or when it first launched Copilot, or if it's now acceptable behavior.
Right. No other comments on Microsoft Copilot? Well, in that case, should we leave it there? I'd like to say thank you so much to our experts today. Irwin, Melody, Evan, Craig, and Zeus Kerravala, and of course, Kieran Devlin. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.